Well, I want to welcome in Cameron Wolfe. He is an NFL Network reporter. You can catch him Sunday mornings on NFL Game Day. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, Steph, what's going on?
It's great to see you after all this time.
Good to see you too.
The last time I saw you was right before everything, shut down at Miami for the Super Bowl. Lots has changed since then.
Yeah, what was that, like 18 months ago? A lot has changed since then.
I know. You're a father now, getting a new gig. Congrats. Lots going on in your neck of the woods, huh?
Yeah, no, it's been super busy. I got a daughter. She's running around everywhere. It's been crazy. And yeah, just been working, traveling a lot, new gig with NFL Network. So it's been allowing me to cover the league, which has been awesome, kind of stretching my skill set, doing a lot more TV, which has been dope. And yeah.
It's been an interesting football season, so I wanted to get into some mid-season takes you have. You covered the Titans last week. Chiefs are struggling a bit. Mahomes had one of the worst performances of his career, 20 of 35 passes for 206 yards, an interception, and a lost fumble. Left the game with a concussion protocol, taking a hard hit. So I'm wondering, do you think the Chiefs are done, or has the league really figured out Mahomes?
I wouldn't say they're done. Not yet. I wouldn't count a guy like Patrick Mahomes out or a team like the Chiefs out, but there are some serious issues with that team. Just watching them this past Sunday, that's the worst defense I've seen all year. That defense has a lot of issues, and that's even before you get to Patrick Mahomes and some of the issues they have offensively. I think a lot of times we saw Patrick Mahomes as like this superhero type figure, and I kept watching Sunday and I'm thinking he's trying too hard to be a superhero. He feels like he has to score 50 points with every drive, and defenses are playing a lot of zone coverage, a lot of two-man coverage with two safeties deep up top, so that's forcing him to be patient. And that's the one thing he hasn't been, he hasn't had to be, because he's had Travis Kelce, he's had Tyreek Hill. So is that fixable in season? I think that's the big question, because a lot of the issues have been turnovers. If they fix the turnovers, they're still a really good offense, but is that fixable? So they're 3-4 right now. You got a Chargers team that's really hot. The Raiders are really hot. I think both of those teams are 2 games ahead of them in the division. We got to start asking if the Chiefs are even going to make the playoffs. And that's something that I couldn't have imagined asking, 6 or 7 games ago.
Yeah, and I know you are on the Derrick Henry train in Nashville for MVP, 69 rushing yards, 10 touchdowns this season. He's definitely a force to be reckoned with, but I'm wondering, what do you think the upside is with this Titans team? Lots going on for them as well.
They're old school. They're built differently. They have a saying, Tennessee tough. You kind of hear that and you're like, what does that mean? Well, they got a 250-pound running back who's the head of their offense. And more times than not, you'll see a team and the Titans run the ball more than they pass, which is unheard of in this era, but they find ways to win. I found it interesting covering them the last 2 weeks. They've had more comeback wins under Mike Vrabel and Ryan Tannehill than any team in the league since those two came together, which I would not have expected. You think a team built on its running game can't come back, but they find ways to win in fourth quarters. I think what's really going to set them apart is what happens with Tannehill and A.J. Brown going forward. Derrick Henry's always going to be the engine. I think that he's the best running back in the league, but when you get into playoff time, your quarterback is going to have to make a throw at some point. And let's be real, the Titans are not going to have the quarterback advantage on paper in most of those matchups. Ryan Tannehill versus Lamar Jackson, or Ryan Tannehill versus Patrick Mahomes, all of those, everybody's going to pick the other quarterback. But I think what Ryan Tannehill has shown, in his time with the Titans, is that he can be really effective on play action. And I saw them the last 2 weeks really dice defenses up when they put their defenders in the box to stop Derrick Henry. So I think this team is a Super Bowl contender. And a lot of people look at me when I say that, it's like, can they really get to the Super Bowl? I think they can. They made the AFC Championship 2 years ago, and I think they have the same formula. And if Julio Jones, I think he could be the X factor. If he ends up getting healthy, he hasn't done much so far this year, then you have 2 formidable receivers and Derrick Henry, and that offense is going to be hard to stop. So I think the Titans, you got to speak with them in the same voice as the Buffalo Bills, as whoever you put atop the AFC.
It's time to talk about the Titans as a Super Bowl contender. I like it. I know there was a lot of hype around them this preseason, especially with the Julio trade, but there has been some more surprises this season. Lots of high hopes for some fan bases. The Browns were hoping to get back in there. The Chiefs were a big surprise as well. So many different directions a lot of fan bases have seen their teams go. I'm wondering, what's the biggest surprise for you this season?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest surprise for me is probably the Cincinnati Bengals. This is a team that I think last year they were one of the worst teams in the league. They got a top 5 pick or top 6 pick out of it. And they look like a completely different team. Joe Burrow's healthy. I got a chance to cover them earlier this year, a Thursday night football game versus the Jags. And I talked to them throughout that week, and they were like, we're not the same old Bengals. That was their mentality. They're like, hey, we want to prove that we're different. And boy, are they different. They smacked the Baltimore Ravens the other day. And I think their physicality up front is what really sets it apart for me. A lot of the hype is on Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. And I think that's a great combo. But defensively, they have the front now to compete with those teams in the AFC North, like the Ravens, like the Browns, like the Steelers, and they aren't little brother anymore. I talked to Mike Hilton about 3 weeks ago, and he said that when he was with the Steelers, they used to view the Bengals as the little brother because every time they played, they'd always be scrappy, but they can never win. And now it's different. So I think that Joe Burrow is showing that he can be a top 10 quarterback in this league with what he's doing. And Jamar Chase was the perfect pick for them. So I think that they are well on pace, and I actually would pick them to win the AFC North if I was making picks. I think they're the best team in that division, and that's saying a lot when you've got Lamar Jackson in that division and also the Browns defense in that running game.
Yeah, it's good to see the Bengals on the upside this year. But also, you talked about that Thursday night game against the Jags. Lots of drama came following that game, of course, with head coach Urban Meyer. There's been lots of controversy this year with head coaches. You got Gruden with the emails. Nagy's being questioned of whether he'll leave midway through the season or wait till the end until he's let go. Who do you think's on the biggest hot seat right now?
Yeah, I think there's probably a few people that you can really circle. I think Matt Nagy has to be one of them. I think I was actually a little bit surprised he came back this season, coming in after having a rough couple of seasons in a row. But I think if the Bears don't make the playoffs, then Matt Nagy's probably out in Chicago. They've got Justin Fields there, and he hasn't had a great start to his career. I think he needs a better scheme, a better coaching staff around him, and he also needs to be better. But I think that's probably a job that's going to open up if they don't make the playoffs. And also I'll go to one of the other former Chicago Bears coaches, Vic Fangio, is now in Denver. I think that's another job that could possibly open up. That's a Denver team that hasn't been the same since the Super Bowl with Peyton Manning. They've been trying to find their way, and they hired Vic Fangio, and it just hasn't worked out so far. The offense has still been scuttling, and they lost that ugly game against the Browns on Thursday night when the Browns are playing Case Keenum, their backup quarterback. They have everybody down and injured. They have a guy in Dearness Johnson who was, fishing a year and a half ago who runs for 150 yards on them. So I think that Broncos team is another team, if they miss the playoffs, that their head coach is probably out. And there's always a surprise every year. I would be interested to see what happens with Mike Zimmer in Minnesota if they don't make the playoffs. He's been there for forever. They've been kind of teetering on mediocrity. At some point, you've got to make that next step. And, if they miss the playoffs, that might be another job that I wouldn't be shocked to see come open.
As these openings come about, I'm curious which coaches are on the lookout for you. Who do you think could take some of these positions as more open up?
Yeah, I got to start with Buffalo. That was a team last year where they had two coordinators in Brian DeBoer and Leslie Frazier that I was actually surprised didn't get a head coach job. With Brian, I think that what he's done with Josh Allen and that offense has generated a lot of buzz throughout the league. And I think that he's a guy who's going to be atop a lot of teams' head coach lists. The way owners work, they love those offensive-minded head coaches to groom a young quarterback. And I think that Brian's going to be a guy who I believe gets a job this offseason somewhere. So, and Leslie Frazier, he's another vet guy. He's been a DC for 20, 30 years in this league. And I think that he's sort of in the mold of that Vic Fangio, but I think that he has a leadership ability to be able to command an entire team. So if you've got a veteran team that maybe just needs a guy who can right the ship, and if you got a veteran quarterback, that might be the right spot for him to kind of move in. So those are two guys I start with. Vance Joseph out there in Arizona has been doing a heck of a job. He had a rough first go as a head coach in Denver, but I think we got to give these coaches second chances. A lot of times their second time is better than their first time. Ask Bill Belichick. He had that experience as well. So I think that Vance Joseph is another name that you'll see talked about a lot in the head coach cycle.
And we're also approaching the NFL trade deadline. You've been right there in the front with the Miami Dolphins and the Deshaun Watson rumors. And, today you were told that Flores shared the message that Tua is their QB, but, we're a few days away. Do you think he will remain the Dolphins QB after the deadline?
That's the question of the week, right? That's why I'm here. I think that people are frustrated here in Miami that Flores hasn't said more and said, hey, no, we're not trading for him. That's not his style of way. He's not going to do a Mike Tomlin and go never say never. That's just not how he does things. But I do think the Dolphins have had talks with the Texans. But I don't believe that it's a guarantee that Deshaun Watson gets traded from the deadline. I've seen a lot of these reports, but I think there's still a lot of complications when it comes to compensation, when it comes to the legal issues that's going on with Deshaun, and there's 6 days left. So at this point, I think that somebody is going to have to change their ask. The Texans are going to have to go down on what they're asking for. The Dolphins are going to have to go up or become more comfortable with what's going on with Deshaun. Because at this time, I've been told that nothing is imminent. So, we're 6 days away and, deadline spur action. So maybe that happens in this situation. But I think there's a very real chance that we're sitting here the Wednesday after the trade deadline and Deshaun Watson's still a Houston Texan.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier a couple of times that Miami is your biggest disappointment this season because, this was supposed to be a step forward for Miami and Brian Flores. They're 1-6 now. Why is this so surprising to you? What do you think is not clicking? It's got to be more than just the QB, right?
Yeah, it's way more than the QB. I mean, Tua got hurt earlier this year, which didn't help. So he missed a few games. But the biggest part of this disappointment to me has been the defense. This is a defense that they were a borderline top 5 group last year. Xavier Howard had 10 interceptions. He was in the running for Defensive Player of the Year. And this year, they've been below average. Teams have been figuring them out. They've been really basic in what they've been doing. And honestly, they've been outcoached some games. The game they lost to Jacksonville, that was a bad loss, losing to a team that had lost 20 consecutive games. And Urban Meyer just flat out outcoached Brian Flores in that game. So I think that it's been a few things. Offensively, they've been out of sync. The couple of receivers they brought in and Wolfe Fuller and Jalen Waddle haven't had the impact that they thought. Wolfe Fuller's been hurt all season. He hasn't had any impact. And Jalen Waddle has been used more as a possession receiver. And they still have one of the worst offensive lines in the league. So I think it's a combination of their talent just not being as good as maybe we thought, but also just, whether it's coaching or playing, they've played below their expectations. So it's frustrating for Dolphins fans because this is year 3 of their rebuild. They thought this was heading towards, the right direction. 10-6 last year. We're trending up, and now you're 1-6, and you're one of the worst teams in the league. So there's a lot of questions here in Miami. How are we going to fix this? Is Brian Flores the right guy to lead us? Is Chris Greer the right guy? So before we get to whether they trade Deshaun Watson or not, I think that they've got to figure out how to fix the rest of this roster, because whether Deshaun Watson is here or not, this team is not good enough to make a playoff run this year or anytime soon. So a lot of work to be done here in Miami, which has sort of been the story for the last 20 years.
Yeah, tanking for Tua, and then now they want to trade him just a couple years after. But another quarterback who might be in a new spot next season is Aaron Rodgers. He plays in Thursday Night Football, probably the biggest Thursday night game of the season. He will not have potentially his most important target in Davante Adams, who tested positive for COVID-19. Just a few hours after announcing he's on the reserve list, the Packers moved from getting 3.5 points to 6 as an underdog in Arizona. Huge line movement there. And I'm wondering, do you think that Green Bay has any chance without Adams? They are 6-0 over the past 3 years without Adams, but now they're going up against a 7-0 Cardinals team who is looking pretty dominant. Do you think they have any shot without him?
I do think they have a shot. I think one thing about Aaron Rodgers that always has impressed me is he's made sort of obscure receivers, sort of stars in spotlight moments. So I think along with Davante Adams, Alan Lazard also tested positive for COVID. So he's out, and he's one of their other top receivers. So it's going to be quite a challenge, especially like we talked about, that Cardinals defense has been one of the best in the league. But I wouldn't rule out Aaron Rodgers yet. I think they have a few guys there who he has some chemistry with. Aquania St. Brown is, I believe, one of them. He's had Randall Cobb there, and he's another guy who he's played with for most of his career. And one of the rookies, Amari Rodgers, he hasn't played a lot this year, but I loved him coming out of college. He probably will get more opportunities Thursday night. So I think that it's going to be interesting to see what they do game plan wise, because Aaron Jones is one of their best running backs, but they don't often feed him enough as much as they want. So this would be a perfect game for them to feature Aaron Jones and then maybe have Aaron Rodgers have some timely throws. So I'd still think that Arizona should win this game, but don't count out Green Bay because Aaron Rodgers loves to make magic when the cards are stacked against him.
That's right. And then I have some quick ones just to finish it off. And I'm wondering which quarterback throughout the league you think is the most impressive this season. There's a couple, and then we see the rookies struggling. Which quarterback do you think has been the most impressive and which one has been the most disappointing?
Kyler Murray for me. I think that if you look at maybe front runners of MVP, Derrick Henry, obviously I talked about earlier, but Kyler Murray, 7-0, completing nearly over 73% of his passes. Baby Yoda has looked like a star. So he would be my vote there. As far as disappointments, I think that, you hate to go disappointment because this guy's really good, but Patrick Mahomes has not played to his level this year. He's actually tied for the league lead in interceptions with Zach Wilson for the Jets, which is a shock. So if I had to pick disappointment halfway through the year, I'd probably say Patrick Mahomes.
And on the flip side, which defensive player has been the most impressive?
Oh, that's a good question. Defensive player. Let me go with somebody a little bit more obscure. I've been really impressed with Greg Rousseau out there in Buffalo. He's a rookie who, honestly, coming out of the draft, I didn't have a lot of expectations for immediate contribution. He won Defensive Player of the Week a couple of weeks ago, and he's really been a key for that Buffalo defense, kind of hitting that next level.
Yeah, and then when you're looking at the playoffs and which teams are where they stack now, the ones at the bottom of the list, like maybe the Jets, the Texans, Miami, who do you think of the bottom teams that have the most potential to get out of the rut and maybe break 500?
That's a good question. I think that you look at
we have some hopeful fan bases out there.
The Colts have started to, the Indianapolis Colts have really turned it around over the last couple of weeks. But that was a team that I circled when I watched them earlier this year. I think they started 0-4. That I thought they had more talent than they were playing with. So that team is started. They're not at the very bottom, but I think they could end up making a run for the playoffs. From where they started in particular. I don't know if any of those teams, the Jets, the Dolphins, I don't think any of those teams are going to end up being playoff teams, but I could definitely see the Colts making a run. The Seahawks are another team that I'd watch. They lost last night and they're 2-5 now, but Russell Wilson should be back in a week or two from that injury. They have a bye coming in week 9. So if he comes back, I wouldn't be surprised to see Russ run off a run where they win 7 or 8 consecutive games and they make a run for a playoff spot there. So Seattle and Indianapolis were probably the teams now that I'd say who have losing records that could make the playoffs.
It's gearing up to be an exciting second half of the season. I really appreciate you joining me. Where can we see you?
Yeah, NFL Network, game day mornings, 9 a.m. Eastern time. We can come on there, talk some ball, and NFL Network throughout the week. We chat football, everything you need to know. So appreciate you.
You're doing a great job. I love following your work, and it's great catching up and hearing more about everything you're covering. It's been great chatting with you.
Absolutely. Appreciate you, Steph.
Thanks. Have a good one.